Let's talk a little bit about the inevitability of criticism. So, as the individual, apparently separate body mind entity, or the ego, the very existence of the apparently separate ego is an imposition of imperfection upon that which is perfect. And this imposition has been imposed by that which is perfect upon itself. The absolute truth, or God, has imposed this limitation of the ego upon itself. And the only thing the ego wants is to expand its boundary to be more than what it is right now. So criticism is basically when it's you can define criticism as the pointing out of flaws or imperfections, and every flaw diminishes the imagined boundary that the ego has identified with. And this is what creates the phenomenon of sensitivity to criticism. When people get angry about being criticized, it's because their imagined boundaries are being threatened by the other. So, if you simply look at the limitlessness of the absolute truths here and now, then there are no boundaries, and therefore you cannot be diminished or aggrandized by any experience. And criticism and flattery make no difference to you. But if you are identified with your boundaries, if you think you are just what is within the limited circle within which you experience life, then you are in a constant process of attempting to enlarge this boundary. But the absolute truth is both what's inside the boundary and what's outside the boundary. And in fact, life, through its infinite compassion and grace, is attempting to help you dissolve your boundaries. So, in fact, when you get criticism, your boundary is being diminished, and that is a form of compassion because it helps you to observe that you are imposing boundaries and that you are identified with these boundaries and are dependent upon the size of these boundaries for your well being. So when there is an apparent diminishment of the boundary, you can see it as an opportunity to look beyond boundaries altogether. So as long as you believe that you are bounded, limited, separate, and as long as you're attempting to grow, life always thwarts that attempt at growth. There is always conflict, there is always resistance from life to your attempts at growth. And therefore, the process of growth is a struggle. So pain, as long as you're identified with the ego, pain is inevitable because either you go through the pain of taking the quality of your actions to such a level that they cannot be criticized, which is that you make the best approximation to perfection that you can, or you compromise on the quality of your work and prepare to be criticized. And even if you put in as much into your work as you can, there will still be criticism because if you look, for example, take the IMDb ratings for movies. Even the top movies are 9.1 or 9.2 on 10. There is no movie there which is 10 on 10. So criticism is inevitable because the limitation on the absolute truth which the absolute truth imposes upon itself in the form of the ego is imperfect. As we have discussed, every individual form in the cosmos is fundamentally imperfect in the sense that it is not any form that is not that form. So this imperfection leads to the potential for criticism, basically. And however good your work is, there will always be, it is still limited, it is still not the absolute because you still, the very attachment to that work comes from the belief in being limited and separate. So as long as you are identified with the ego, criticism is inevitable because the ego is fundamentally imperfect. And as soon as you dissolve your boundaries and go beyond the ego, which is actually doable here and now, you become immune to criticism.